I'm Leo Walter for Kit Guru. I know what you're thinking. You're wondering why on earth is he reviewing the Meshify C from Fractal Design yet again. I'm not. This is the new Fractal Design Meshify C Mini, a Micro-ATX case rather than ATX, so it's about yay much lower in vertical height than the previous model. I'm just going to take off the tempered glass panel so you can see more easily inside. Dark glass, flat piece of glass. It's got a black paint around the periphery and it's held on with 4 thumb screws. Dark. You see? Dark. And with the glass out of the way, you can see what I built inside the PC, which is very similar to the spec of the PC that I chose for the Meshify C review, which was back in September, so less than 6 months ago. I've deliberately stuck with a Ryzen 7 1700X CPU from AMD because I was keen to check thermals and to see how this Micro-ATX case compared to the ATX. My instinct was no difference. However, there is one significant difference, which is that last time around I used the GTX 980 graphics card. This is a GTX 1080 Ti. Obviously, in many respects, they're very similar, but clearly the 1080 Ti has much more grunt to it. On the other hand, it also has better power management. Spoiler alert, it's actually a better graphics card all round, both in terms of power at idle, also power under load. The motherboard I've chosen is of interest in that obviously it's Micro-ATX. It's an Asus Prime B350MA. I didn't put any great thought into which motherboard I was going to use. I've only got the one Micro-ATX Ryzen motherboard. It happens to be one I bought myself when the platform launched. I thought it might be handy to have a Micro-ATX. I've also got the Gigabyte Mini ITX because, again, handy to have. I never paid much attention to the spec of the Asus Prime when I bought it. Micro-ATX, Ryzen, job done, buy it. And the funny thing was, I noted when I was building this PC, it doesn't have very many fan headers. To be frank, it has 2 fan headers, one for the CPU, one for a chassis fan. The thing is, this case has 2 fans installed as stock, one in the front, one in the back. Let me just pull off the front filter. Now, we've got the full-length dust filter in the bottom, full length, so it goes back to the power supply. That's nice and easy to remove as before. And then we've got the front panel filter, which will reveal the front fan. I had to remind myself how on earth you remove it. I struggled a bit with the Meshify C, and many other reviewers did as well, I note. It's not the least bit obvious how you do it. The manual doesn't make it too clear. I went back to my notes for the original review and it's exactly the same process. So you lift the front slightly, fingers up there, and you pop a hidden trigger, which is that part there, not clear. You can actually pull the entire front panel off, and if you do that, you still can't figure out how to remove the filter. So it would be handy if Fractal was to make it more obvious in the manual. So there we go. Lots of mesh, some internal foam, which will both filter dust but also be a bit noise deadening, and the Fractal logo. And there we have the front fan not rotating because I have nowhere to connect it to. Now, the Asus Prime motherboard is a completely typical Micro-ATX design, but it throws up a fundamental point about Micro-ATX, apart from the fact it's physically smaller than ATX, which is it's a cheaper platform. People buying a Micro-ATX expect it to be cheaper than ATX, so you lose on things. Obviously, you lose an expansion slot. Now, in the past, you used to have on ATX typically support for either 2 or 3 graphics cards. eATX could go up to 4 graphics cards. Micro-ATX, you typically get dual graphics card slots. Mini ITX, obviously, 1. But other bits and pieces are likely to take a hit as well. Perhaps the VRMs. In this instance, fan headers would be one thing. As I say, I bought the board. I didn't even notice it. So, my bad, but this does highlight a fundamental thing. So, you're buying a Micro-ATX motherboard to go in your Micro-ATX chassis, absolutely fine. You don't check how many fan headers you got, whoops. Now, had I removed the front fan and put the liquid cooler in the front, no problem. The liquid cooler happens to be a Fractal Design Celsius S24, but it's a conventional 240mm A-Stec. I reviewed this before for Kit Guru and I've used it in a couple of builds. Very good liquid cooler, obviously appropriate to use a Fractal cooler with a Fractal chassis. Had I put it in the front, removed the fan, you'd have been none the wiser, very likely. Nonetheless, it illustrates the point. Liquid cooler in the roof, chassis fan at the rear connected to motherboard, chassis fan at front sitting there not working. Such is life. One other change that Fractal's made in the move from the Meshify C to the Meshify C Mini is you can no longer put a 360 cooler in the front, 240, 280 in the front, 240 in the roof, 120 in the rear, 120 in the floor should you want. But You cannot take out this hatch here and put a 360 radiator in the front. You can, if you choose, remove that hatch, which involves taking out the drive bays, and then you can put 3 120 fans down the front. Truth be told, I cannot see the point in doing that. The front panel flows air well, it cools nicely. Thermals in this particular build, they're the same as the Meshify C, despite that change in graphics cards. CPU temperatures are just the same, that's all there is to it. And that's with the inert front fan. So the rest of the spec of the build, so we've got the Asus Prime B350MA motherboard, we've got some G-Skill FlareX DDR4 3200 MHz memory, dual channel. We've used the FlareX in a number of Ryzen and Threadripper builds, works very well. GTX 1080 Ti graphics card, that's the AMD Ryzen 7 1700X CPU. Power supply, Seasonic Prime Titanium 600 watt fanless is sitting beneath the power supply shroud. You insert the power supply from the rear of the chassis. There's a plate that comes off, in it slides. You can't put it in from the side if you want to. It's quite tight for space for cables, but they go, it's not a problem. And then we've got an M.2 Samsung PM951 SSD. So the spec of the PC, perfectly sound. I had toyed with the idea of fitting a Vega 64 graphics card. It doesn't fit in this chassis. It's accommodating, but you can't put any hardware you choose in it, and it would in a way have been a little bit silly, but fun. So around the back, we've got the rear panel, which is secured with 2 captive thumb screws. No noise deadening material. Pretty much the most basic side panel we're ever going to see. Pull it round. And there we have the rear of the chassis. So we've got the Seasonic power supply, we've got the cables nicely captive, we've got a bunch of different cable tie-down points, and we've got the hook and loop straps with Fractal logo that keep them all tucked away neatly. Down here we have 2 drive bays. I've installed an SSD and also a hard drive just to illustrate the point, although you can see there are no cables connecting them up, but the point is they go in neatly enough, and the cables can be organised to avoid the drives. If you choose to do without those drive bays, you can take them out, remove the hardware, should you want more space down the bottom for some cooling hardware. Overall, the system works perfectly nicely. The I/O is very conventional: headset jacks, power reset buttons, a pair of USB 3.0 ports. Nothing particularly exciting there. Overall, it's a perfectly sound little case, but it takes us back to the original question of who on earth uses Micro-ATX in 2018? There's no reason why you can't build a decent gaming PC into this chassis. Let's just have a look back round at the main side again. I mean, Ryzen 7, GTX 1080 Ti, SSD, loads of DDR4. That's a proper gaming PC right there. It works nicely. It will deliver some serious stomp in your gaming. But the question is, why wouldn't you just build an ATX? I mean, you're saving £10 on the price of the chassis if you go Micro-ATX. Well, £10, yeah, I mean, you'll take it, won't you? But it's neither here nor there. The motherboard will be slightly cheaper, but as demonstrated with the fan headers, you're losing out 1 or 2 features. And you know you'll be losing something. I mean, forget the expansion slot. Obviously, you're losing, well, 2 expansion slots you're losing. That is probably neither here nor there, but you're going to lose other features from the motherboard. So you'll be saving some money on the motherboard, you'll be saving a little bit of money on the case, but that's the only money you're saving. So you're building a slightly cheaper PC, and every so often you're going to run into a snag like fan headers, or perhaps you wanted an extra M.2 slot and you've only got the 1. That sort of thing. Not the end of the world, but the sort of thing that might get just a little bit vexing and make you think, I should have just gone with ATX. So to me, unless you happen to have a particularly small alcove your PC is going into and it has to fit in that height rather than that height, and that doesn't seem very likely to me, or you really want just the smallest PC, but then let's face it, that's mini ITX. To me, what this is actually saying is, system builders, the people who need to cut every £10 or every pound off they possibly can to get the price down to a certain point, this is really a case for system builders. The Meshify C is a perfectly decent case. It does a perfectly sound job. It's not the best case on the market, but it flows air nicely. It looks quirky, and the front panel's good. We like the front panel. That's good. The full filtration, that's also good. It's got some sensible features. It's not the most exciting case in the market, but it's sensible. And this slightly smaller, slightly cheaper version, no harm there. But to me, this is not a case for enthusiasts. It's much more a case for small system builders who want to get the price down, but look like they're delivering something other than a beige box. So a decent case, but not the world's most exciting case. Nonetheless, if you're thinking of going Micro-ATX, this is absolutely a case you ought to be considering. If you like this video, thumbs up. If you don't, thumbs down. If you want more from Kit Guru, click to subscribe. I'm Leo Waldock. This is the Fractal Design Meshify C Mini.